The sky outside the corporate office windows was a dull, oppressive gray as I sat across from Brenda Vance, my manager at Apex Logistics. Her immaculate desk was cluttered with designer accessories that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. I watched in quiet disbelief as she casually flipped through my promotion application with practiced disinterest. 5 years of sacrificed weekends, missed dinners with my son Tyler, and endless unpaid overtime hours had been condensed into a 50-page portfolio that Brenda barely glanced at before setting it aside next to her half-empty latte. "I appreciate your enthusiasm, Raymond," Brenda said, adjusting her expensive glasses and offering a condescending smile. "But I have reviewed your application thoroughly, and while your work has been adequate, I do not believe you are qualified for senior management. Perhaps in another year or two we can revisit this." Adequate. The word dropped between us like a lead weight, echoing in the quiet expanse of her corner office. For a moment, all I could hear was the hum of the air conditioning. I had maintained the logistics department highest client satisfaction ratings across the entire eastern seaboard. I had personally saved the Harrison manufacturing account when everyone else had written it off as a lost cause due to a catastrophic supply chain failure. I had not taken a full weekend off in 3 years, constantly monitoring freight movements and customs clearances. But I only smiled and nodded, slipping into the practiced expression I had perfected over my decades in corporate America. "I understand. Thank you for the feedback." "I am glad we are on the same page," Brenda replied, her eyes already darting to the glowing screen of her smartwatch. "The Vanguard Industries proposal needs your attention today. They have requested additional compliance metrics before signing the final contract." As gathered my carefully bound portfolio, Brenda was already typing an email, my career disappointment seemingly forgotten in an instant. I walked out of her office, stepping past the vacant executive suite that should have been mine. It had a window view overlooking the shipping yards and a solid oak door where my name rightfully belonged. I did not return to my cubicle immediately. Instead, I took the elevator down to the parking garage. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I am 52 years old. I have spent 15 years in the logistics industry, learning every complex regulation, every loophole, and every pressure point. The man looking back at me was not sad, and surprisingly, he was not even angry. He looked calculating. I started the engine, listening to the steady idle, and made 2 decisions that would dismantle the delicate house of cards Brenda had built on my back. First, I would cancel my upcoming vacation to the mountains, the one Tyler had been looking forward to for months. Second, I would strictly adhere to my exact job description, and not a single syllable more. No one at the office knew it yet, but their perfect, automated system was entirely dependent on my invisible labor, and it was about to crash spectacularly. Before I explain the chaos that followed, let me provide some context. My name is Raymond Davis, and until that afternoon, I was the most reliable, overworked employee at Apex Logistics. I was not the most visible, nor was I the highest paid. I was simply the man who kept the wheels turning while upper management took the credit and the massive bonuses. I am methodical by nature. I possess an almost photographic memory for regulatory frameworks and operational processes. Growing up in a working-class neighborhood taught me to anticipate problems before they exploded, a survival skill that transferred seamlessly to corporate logistics. When I joined Apex 5 years ago, the department was a catastrophic mess. My predecessor had vanished after a bitter dispute with the regional director, taking all institutional knowledge with him. There was no documentation, no transition protocols, and we were hemorrhaging money. Clients were threatening lawsuits, and nobody had a clue how to stabilize the bleeding. I spent my first 4 months reverse engineering every single workflow. I stayed in the office until 2 in the morning, decoding encrypted vendor spreadsheets and reconstructing client shipping histories from fragmented emails. I created exhaustive, color-coded operational guides for every process. Brenda never bothered to learn these systems. Why would she, when I handled every crisis before it even reached her desk? "You are a natural problem solver, Raymond," she would say during my annual performance reviews, always followed by a modest cost of living raise that never truly matched the immense value I provided. Apex Logistics had recently secured a multi-million-dollar contract with Vanguard Industries, a defense contractor with incredibly strict compliance requirements. I had built that relationship from nothing. I learned their industry inside and out, staying late to coordinate with their overseas manufacturing plants. Brenda had attended exactly 3 meetings with Vanguard, mostly just to smile and claim credit when the regional executives were watching. Every morning, I arrived at 6:30 to prepare comprehensive briefing notes so Brenda would look competent during her morning management huddles. Every evening, I sent detailed status reports on all active freight movements. I was a ghost in the machine, ensuring perfection. But after that rejection, the ghost was going on strike. I drove home that evening and opened my personal laptop. I began reviewing my employment contract and the corporate bylaws. I also started looking into the Fair Labor Standards Act. As a salaried employee, I was classified as exempt from overtime. However, my actual job duties, which largely consisted of data entry, routine tracking, and non-managerial tasks, did not meet the legal criteria for the administrative exemption under the FLSA. Apex Logistics owed me years of unpaid overtime, but that was just the beginning. I thought about the environmental compliance reports for the California transport routes. The law, specifically California Penal Code Section 470 regarding forgery, is very clear. Brenda had been forging my signature on those critical emissions documents for months because she was too lazy to wait for my official review. She was legally misrepresenting our compliance to state regulators, an act that constituted a severe breach of fiduciary duty to the company's shareholders. I had kept copies of every forged document, safely backed up on an external drive. The trap was set. All I had to do was stop working miracles and let gravity do the rest. The morning after my rejected promotion, the atmosphere in the office felt exactly the same, but the fundamental laws of physics governing our department had been rewritten. I did not arrive at 6:30. I arrived at exactly 9 o'clock. I walked through the sliding glass doors, swiped my badge, and proceeded to my desk. I drafted no briefing notes for Brenda. I opened my email and only responded to messages that were directly addressed to me, deliberately ignoring the complex group threads where I usually intervened to prevent disasters. At 10:15, a crisis erupted with a major trucking supplier in the Midwest. They were refusing to release a shipment of sensitive electronics due to a billing discrepancy. Usually, I would spend an hour on the phone, leveraging personal relationships and navigating the arcane billing software to force the release. Today, I simply forwarded the email to the accounts payable department with a polite note stating this was out of my scope. By lunch, the confusion was palpable. Greg Mitchell, a junior coordinator who usually relied on my constant guidance, stopped by my cubicle. He looked like a deer caught in headlights. "Raymond, did you see the urgent thread about the Harrison manufacturing scheduling conflict?" Greg asked, shifting his weight nervously. "Yes, I did, Greg," I replied, not taking my eyes off my monitor as I meticulously filed an email. Greg waited for more. He stood there for a full 30 seconds before finally asking, "So, can you fix it like you usually do?" "The Harrisons threatening to shut down their assembly line if those parts do not arrive by tomorrow morning." I stopped typing and looked up at him with a calm, pleasant expression. "That is actually under the procurement and routing department's purview. I have forwarded the issue to them." Greg's eyes widened. "But you always handle these routing emergencies. Nobody in procurement knows how to expedite the Harrison freight without triggering the penalty clauses." I offered a sympathetic smile. "I have been advised by Brenda to focus strictly on my assigned responsibilities as outlined in my job description. I am trying to demonstrate that I understand my proper place in the organization, as I am not currently qualified for senior management level problem solving." Greg backed away slowly, clutching his tablet as if it might explode. By 5 o'clock, the office was buzzing with low-level panic. I calmly packed up my briefcase. I did not check the emergency pager. I did not load the remote access software onto my laptop. I walked to my car, drove home, and cooked dinner for my son Tyler. We made homemade pizza, a messy, joyful process that I usually sacrifice for late-night conference calls. "Why are you home so early, Dad?" Tyler asked, covered in flour and grinning. I paused, looking at his bright, curious face. I realize that my time is the most valuable thing I own, Tyler, and I want to spend more of it with you. I am done giving it away for free." He hugged me, leaving a dusty white handprint on my shirt. It was the best evening I had experienced in half a decade. While we ate, my phone remained face down on the kitchen counter. I knew it was buzzing. I knew the emails were piling up. I knew the Harrison assembly line was likely grinding to a halt, costing them tens of thousands of dollars an hour. I slept incredibly well that night. The next morning, day 2 of my new philosophy, the cracks in the foundation became gaping fissures. I arrived at 9 o'clock precisely. The Vanguard Industries client, our most lucrative account, had requested urgent modifications to their cross-border shipping protocols. These were highly technical changes that required an intimate understanding of customs regulations and internal software capabilities. I was the only person in the building who knew how to implement them without triggering an automated audit. Brenda attempted to lead the response team. I watched through the glass walls of the conference room as she pointed aggressively at whiteboards, her face flushed with stress. Without my detailed briefings, she was completely lost. At 10:30, she practically sprinted out of the conference room and marched over to my desk. "Raymond, where are the process notes for the Vanguard Customs integrations?" she demanded, her voice tight and breathless. "They are located in the shared network drive," I replied pleasantly, taking a sip of my coffee. "Under the Client Implementations folder. I mentioned this during the quarterly review last month." Brenda glared at me. "There are hundreds of files in that directory." "Which one specifically?" I casually opened the directory on my screen. The master index is titled Vanguard Complete Integration Documentation. It is 300 pages long, organized by regulatory region and compliance metric. Brenda stared at the screen, her eyes darting across the complex table of contents. She looked horrified. "Can you just handle this directly? The client is waiting on the line and they are getting very agitated." "I would be more than happy to assist," I said, leaning back in my chair. "However, I have the routine weekly inventory reconciliation scheduled for this morning, which is explicitly listed as a priority in my job description. I can look at the Vanguard issue sometime tomorrow afternoon." Her jaw clenched. "This cannot wait until tomorrow." "Vanguard is threatening to initiate a breach of contract review." I nodded in understanding. "That sounds serious. Would you like me to request permission from HR to reallocate my designated task hours?" "The reconciliation report is mandated by corporate policy." She spun around and stormed back to the conference room without answering. That evening, I took Tyler to the local baseball batting cages. My corporate cell phone sat locked in my car's glove compartment. When we finally returned home at 8 o'clock, I decided to check it just to gauge the structural integrity of the department. I had 82 missed calls. 82. The voicemails were a symphony of corporate desperation. Greg sounded like he was on the verge of tears. Procurement managers were screaming about penalty fees. And there were 4 increasingly frantic messages from Brenda, begging me to log on and fix the Vanguard routing. There was also an automated alert from the California State Regulatory Board. The environmental compliance documents that Brenda usually forged my signature on had been rejected by the automated system. Because I had quietly changed my internal authorization code the week prior, her forged submissions were now flagged for review. The legal trap was springing shut. The Fair Labor Standards Act violations were one thing, but forgery and falsifying state environmental documents carried severe civil and potentially criminal penalties. Brenda had unknowingly committed a massive breach of fiduciary duty, exposing Apex Logistics to immense liability. By doing absolutely nothing outside my exact job description, I was forcing her to face the consequences of her own fraudulent empire. The system was crumbling, and I was just sitting back watching the dust rise. By the third morning, the environment at Apex Logistics had descended into complete and utter madness. I arrived at 9 o'clock to find the reception area packed with irate logistics coordinators. The usually quiet hum of the office had been replaced by the frantic sounds of ringing phones and heated arguments. As I walked to my desk, I saw Brenda through the glass walls of her office. She looked disheveled. Her designer glasses were pushed up onto her forehead, and she was rubbing her temples as if trying to massage away a massive migraine. Greg practically tackled me before I could even set my briefcase down. "Raymond, where have you been?" he hissed, his eyes wild and bloodshot. "Everything is burning down." The Hearson plant officially shut down their lines at midnight because the freight never arrived. Vanguard is demanding a meeting with the regional director, and Customs just flagged 6 of our westbound trucks for compliance violations. I calmly unpacked my notebook and placed my pen on my desk. "I left at 5 o'clock yesterday, Greg. My contract explicitly states my working hours are 9 to 5. But the Vanguard crisis," Greg stammered, pointing frantically toward Brenda's office. "They are threatening to pull the entire account. Nobody can figure out the new integration protocols." I nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, that process requires specialized handling." As I mentioned to Brenda, all the necessary information is comprehensively detailed in the operational guides I authored last year. "Nobody can understand your guides without you translating them," he almost shouted, drawing the attention of several nearby analysts. "They are too technical." Before I could formulate a response, Brenda's executive assistant, a nervous young woman named Sarah, approached my desk. Her hands were shaking slightly. "Raymond, Brenda needs you in the main conference room immediately." "It is an emergency meeting with Victor Harmon." Victor Harmon was the regional director of Apex Logistics. He operated out of the corporate headquarters in Chicago and rarely visited our branch unless billions of dollars were at stake, or someone was about to be fired. Usually both. I picked up my notebook, smoothed my tie, and walked unhurriedly down the corridor. When I opened the heavy glass door of the conference room, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Victor Harmon sat at the head of the long mahogany table. He was a formidable man in his late 50s, known for his ruthless efficiency and zero tolerance for incompetence. Brenda sat to his right, looking pale and furious. Several thick folders were scattered across the table. "Raymond," Victor said, his deep voice carrying a note of immense relief. "Thank goodness you are here. Please sit down. We need your immediate intervention on this Vanguard situation." I took a seat opposite Brenda, placed my notebook squarely in front of me, and folded my hands. "Of course, Mr. Harmon. How can I be of assistance?" Brenda leaned forward, her eyes narrowing with barely concealed venom. "Let us skip the formalities, Raymond. What is it going to take for you to fix this mess? The promotion? Is that what this childish stunt is about? Fine. You want the senior management title? It is yours. Just log into the system and clear the customs flags." I looked at her, maintaining absolute composure. I tilted my head slightly. "That is a very generous offer, Brenda. However, I have recently been contacted by a competing logistics firm. They have offered me a senior director position with a substantial salary increase. Apparently, they believe my skills are highly qualified for executive leadership." The room fell into a stunned silence. Victor Harmon's eyes widened slightly, a rare display of surprise from the veteran executive. Brenda gripped the edge of the table so hard her knuckles turned white. "You are leaving us?" Victor asked, his tone shifting from authoritative to genuinely concerned. "When did this happen?" "I have not officially accepted their offer yet," I replied smoothly. "I have been taking my time to carefully evaluate my career trajectory." "Name your price," Victor said without hesitation, pulling a gold pen from his inner jacket pocket. "Whatever compensation package they are offering, Apex will match it, plus a retention bonus. We cannot lose you, especially not during a critical operational failure." I smiled politely, shaking my head. "With all due respect, Mr. Harmon, this is not merely about financial compensation. It is about professional respect, ethical leadership, and working in an environment that does not rely on exploitation." "The Vanguard client specifically asked for you, by name this morning," Brenda interjected, her voice shrill. "You cannot possibly abandon the company now. It is highly unprofessional." "That is interesting," I countered calmly, "because 4 other major accounts have also expressed severe dissatisfaction with the current management structure over the past 48 hours. I reached into my briefcase and withdrew a crisp white folder. I slid it across the polished wood table toward Victor. "Here is my formal 2 weeks' notice. I will gladly assist with transitioning my daily tasks to the remaining staff, precisely as my employment contract mandates." Brenda snatched the folder before Victor could reach it. She ripped it open, her eyes scanning the brief resignation letter. "This is blackmail," she hissed. Victor gently but firmly pulled the folder from her hands. He read the letter, closed the folder, and placed his hands flat on the table. "This resignation will not be accepted," Victor stated firmly. "Raymond, I would like to speak with you privately in the executive suite now." As I stood up to follow him, Brenda made a fatal miscalculation. "Victor, you cannot reward this insubordination. He intentionally sabotaged the Vanguard account to make me look bad. He is a liability." Victor stopped at the door and turned back to face her. His expression was cold and unreadable. "Brenda, the only liability I see in this room is the manager whose entire department collapsed the moment one employee decided to simply work his required hours. Do not leave the building. We will be having a separate conversation shortly." I followed Victor down the hall, feeling the weight of the moment. The trap had not just sprung on Brenda. It had captured the attention of the highest levels of corporate leadership. It was time to lay all my cards on the table. The FLSA violations, the forged compliance documents, the systemic incompetence. Apex Logistics was about to experience a paradigm shift, and I was holding the blueprint. I followed Victor Harmon into the executive suite, a cavernous room with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the industrial park. He gestured toward a leather armchair opposite his massive desk. He did not sit behind the desk, instead choosing to sit in the chair next to mine, signaling a shift in the power dynamic. He poured 2 glasses of water from a crystal carafe and handed me one. "I have been monitoring your departmental metrics for the past 2 years, Raymond," Victor began, his voice calm but intense. "I knew you were the engine driving that team. What I did not realize until this morning was that you were also the steering wheel, the brakes, and the navigation system. Brenda has been completely exposed." I took a sip of the water and remained silent, allowing him to lead. "I am deeply concerned by the events of this week," he continued, "but I am even more concerned by what Brenda told me about your promotion application. I was never informed that you applied for the senior management vacancy. Why did you not bring this to my attention?" "I respect the chain of command, Mr. Harmon," I replied evenly. "Brenda is my direct supervisor. Bypassing her would have been a violation of corporate protocol, something I take very seriously." He nodded slowly, appreciating the answer. "Admirable discipline, but clearly the system failed you. I need you to be completely transparent with me right now. What exactly is happening in that department, and what will it take to keep you at Apex Logistics?" I reached back into my briefcase. I had prepared a second dossier, much thicker than my resignation letter. I placed it on the small table between us. "I am going to be completely transparent, Victor, but you need to understand that the issues go far beyond a denied promotion. This is about severe legal liability and a fundamental breach of fiduciary duty by your management staff." Victor frowned, his posture stiffening. "Legal liability? Explain." I opened the dossier. "Let us start with the Fair Labor Standards Act. For the past 5 years, I have been classified as an exempt salaried employee. However, my documented daily duties fall entirely under non-exempt parameters. I have routinely worked 60 to 70-hour weeks without overtime compensation. I have kept meticulous logs. The back pay owed is substantial, but the penalties for willful misclassification could cost the company exponentially more if the Department of Labor gets involved." Victor's face darkened as he scanned the spreadsheets I had provided. "This is incredibly serious. Human Resources will be auditing this immediately." "What else?" I flipped to the next section, revealing copies of the California Environmental Compliance Forms. This is where the situation transitions from labor violations to potential criminal liability. These are the mandatory emissions reports for our westbound freight routes. They require the signature of a certified compliance officer. I am the only certified officer in this branch. I pointed to the signature lines. "Those are not my signatures. Brenda has been routinely forging my name on these state documents for the past 8 months to expedite shipping schedules because she lacked the competence to manage the timelines legally. Under California Penal Code Section 470, this constitutes forgery. Furthermore, by misrepresenting our compliance status to the board, she is committing a massive breach of fiduciary duty. If the state regulatory board investigates, Apex could face millions in fines and lose our operating licenses." Victor stared at the forged documents, his face draining of color. The silence in the room was absolute. He rubbed his eyes, absorbing the catastrophic magnitude of the situation. She forged state documents, he whispered almost to himself. This is a termination offense. It is a prosecutable offense. He looked up at me, his eyes sharp and assessing. Why are you showing me this now? Why not just take your competing offer and report us to the authorities? Because I spent 5 years building the logistical architecture of this branch, I answered honestly. I care about the work. I care about the junior staff who are being poorly managed, and I know exactly how to fix the structural rot, but I refuse to do it while being exploited and managed by someone who is actively endangering the company. Victor closed the dossier and leaned back in his chair. He stared at the ceiling for a long moment before looking back at me. I am creating a new position effective immediately. Executive Director of Operational Logistics. You will report directly to me in Chicago. I am doubling your current base salary, and you will receive a full retroactive compensation package for the FLSA misclassification, structured as a massive signing bonus to avoid regulatory scrutiny. You will have absolute authority over departmental restructuring, hiring, and firing. I did not blink. And Brenda? Victor stood up, walking over to the window and looking out over the shipping yards. Brenda will be escorted off the premises by corporate security within the hour. The legal department will handle her termination and the fallout from the forged documents. She will not receive severance, and we will be considering our options regarding civil litigation for the breach of fiduciary duty. Is that acceptable? It is a necessary first step, I agreed, standing up to join him. But I also need the authority to implement a comprehensive training program for the junior staff. No more single points of failure. The department needs to be robust, not reliant on one person working illegal overtime. You have a blank check? Raymond, Victor said, extending his hand. Just please get Vanguard on the phone and stop the bleeding. I shook his hand firmly. I will have the Vanguard integration stabilized by noon. When I walked out of the executive suite, the corporate landscape had fundamentally changed. I was no longer the invisible workhorse. I was the architect of the new regime, and the demolition of the old one was about to begin. The aftermath was swift and ruthless, operating with the cold efficiency of a perfectly executed supply chain. By 11 o'clock that morning, 2 silent men in dark suits from corporate security arrived at Brenda's office. I watched from my desk as they handed her a cardboard box and stood over her while she packed her designer accessories. Her face was a mask of shock and humiliation. She tried to make eye contact with me as she was escorted down the main aisle, but I was already on a conference call with the Vanguard executives, calmly resolving the integration errors that had caused so much panic. I did not look up as the elevator doors closed behind her for the last time. News of my promotion to executive director swept through the building like wildfire. The official corporate email cited a strategic reorganization to enhance operational excellence. Behind closed doors, the legal team was working frantically to mitigate the damage caused by the forged California compliance documents. They self-reported the discrepancies, paid a hefty but manageable fine, and completely overhauled the authorization protocols, putting everything under my direct supervision. My first official act as executive director was to call Greg Mitchell into my new office, the corner office with the oak door and the view of the shipping yards. He sat down nervously, still traumatized by the chaos of the previous 3 days. Greg, I started, leaning forward. You are an incredibly hard worker, but you have been severely undertrained. Starting tomorrow, you are being promoted to Senior Logistics Coordinator. You will undergo a rigorous 6-week training program that I have personally designed. You are going to learn how the entire system works, not just your small piece of it. Greg looked like he might cry from relief. Thank you, Mr. Davis. I will not let you down. Over the next 6 months, the transformation of Apex Logistics was profound. I hired 2 brilliant data analysts who had been languishing in a competitor's warehouse and completely automated the routine tracking processes that used to consume my nights and weekends. We instituted strict compliance checks that made forgery impossible. The Fair Labor Standards Act issues were resolved company-wide. I made sure every employee was properly classified and compensated for their actual hours worked. The Harrison manufacturing account not only stayed, but they expanded their contract with us, citing our newly found transparency and rapid response times. The Vanguard integration became a case study in efficiency, featured in an industry trade magazine. The department went from being a chaotic, stress-filled environment to a well-oiled machine where people actually left at 5 o'clock. I finally took Tyler on that vacation to the mountains. We spent 2 weeks hiking, fishing, and completely disconnecting from the corporate world. For the first time in years, my phone did not ring once with an emergency. The system I built was strong enough to function without my constant intervention, which is the true hallmark of effective leadership. Sometimes I think about that initial meeting with Brenda, when she told me I was not qualified for management. She was right in one regard. I was not qualified to be the kind of manager she was. I was not qualified to exploit my workers, forge legal documents, or claim credit for other people's sacrifices. I was qualified to build something sustainable. One afternoon, Victor Harmon flew down from Chicago for a quarterly review. We sat in my office, reviewing the phenomenal growth metrics and the drastically reduced employee turnover rates. "You played a dangerous game, Raymond," Victor noted, swirling his coffee. "Letting the system crash to prove a point. It could have destroyed the branch." I shook my head slightly. "I did not crash the system, Victor. I simply stopped preventing the crash." The structural integrity was entirely compromised by incompetent leadership and fraudulent practices. All I did was hold up a mirror. He chuckled softly. "Well, whatever you did, the board is thrilled. You have made this branch the most profitable in the entire logistics network." As he left, I looked out the window at the bustling shipping yard below. Trucks were moving smoothly, freight was being loaded with precision, and the intricate dance of global logistics was proceeding flawlessly. My journey from an overworked, invisible coordinator to the executive director was not about seeking revenge against an arrogant boss. It was about recognizing my own profound value when the company refused to see it. If you ever find yourself carrying the weight of an entire department on your shoulders, watching others reap the rewards of your silent sacrifices, remember this. Your true value is not determined by an arbitrary title or the opinions of an incompetent manager. Your worth is absolute. Sometimes, the most powerful and effective way to prove your indispensability is to simply stop doing the work you are not being compensated for. Let the cracks show. Let the incompetence of others expose itself in the harsh light of reality. Maintain your professionalism, document everything, and wait. Because eventually, the house of cards will fall, and the people holding the checkbook will frantically search for the only person who knows how to rebuild it. And when they find you, you will no longer be negotiating from a place of desperation. You will be dictating the terms of your own success.